So thanks a lot for doing this. I really appreciate it. This is, we're celebrating episode 200. Technically, we're breaking it into 4 episodes for this episode because we only got to 197 and we needed to record. So I think this is technically, we're calling episode 198.
Okay.
So congratulations on being episode 198.
Brilliant.
I think you were also part of episode 32, we'll call it.
Yeah. 33.
33.
2 3s.
Those were good times, and I really appreciate you've been one of our, still to this day, 4 years ago, that is one of the interviews that we talk about it as being like one of the good times of the show, and we really enjoy you. We thought to see a new side of you, and I'm taking credit for that, sending you into superstardom. But on a serious note, it's been interesting to watch your progression becoming comfortable with the media. And I'm curious, before you came to the Sounders, how much experience did you have talking to reporters? What was your experience with the media?
Yeah, I think close to zero. I mean, I was obviously the first year in Columbus, I wasn't playing at all, so there was no reason to have any sort of communication. Barely had communication with the coaching staff.
Siggy was a monster.
At the time, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, when you're out, it's all the focus is on winning,
Sure.
And if you're not part of it, it's an unfortunate side of the game that not a lot of people get to see and understand, how much that can affect a player, most importantly. But back to topic, no pity party here. Second year, obviously, things started to roll. And, you start to win games, and, you go on to a championship, and they want to know why. And, they want to obviously interview the veterans, but they also want to interview the unsung hero type of guys that, I think a lot of those guys were on the team that year. So I got a bit of a taste of it. And to their credit, in Columbus were some very good reporters and even better people. So you felt like they were always on your side, and they weren't trying to throw you under the bus. And, anytime you get those types of reporters who just truly, love the game and want to report both sides of it, and not just negative and bashing the team to get views on their website or whatever it is, but also they want to, praise certain aspects of the game that not a lot of people get and understand. So yeah, a lot of that over the years. Coming to Seattle, obviously much more attention on the team, and so being with Ziggy, coming here, that connection, maybe that's when it started.
I remember the first time I talked to you in 2010, it was at a point where you were, I think you had maybe just played forward at Toronto.
Yeah.
And there was kind of a building narrative among the fan base that it's like, what is Brad Evans doing on the field?
Yeah.
And I felt like you had this very kind of seemed very skeptical that someone wanted to talk to you, and you were kind of ready, you had your guard up a little bit, and then as the interview went on, you seemed to kind of loosen up, like, oh, he's not here to get me. And it's been an interesting progression because now it's like you're the go-to guy for a lot of quotes.
Yeah.
And do you think do you think of that? Like, are you conscious of the fact that reporters will constantly seek you out, especially when there's nothing else to write about?
Yeah, I think if the game's a bit drab, I think you want to go to the person or player who understands the game tactically from an offensive standpoint and a defensive standpoint, positionally, tactically, whatever it is. And I think during the game, I remember certain bits and pieces of kind of what's going on. So I think maybe it's a bit of a better understanding of the game than some other guys who are just, we didn't finish our chances today, and that's...
This is good.
The hazards.
Well, that is I was gonna say that's not what you normally see flying over here. That like Air Force One stuff. What is that? It's the Irish president is flying around in that thing.
By the way, did you guys get what happened to Kovar last night?
No, what happened to
He was like on the phone or an interview with the Irish president last night. They invited him out. Yeah, somehow you guys got to interview him tomorrow and see exactly what happened. But I don't know. It's pretty intense.
Is he Irish?
Yeah, he's got his passport and everything. Yeah.
So is the Irish president recruiting him to play for Ireland?
I don't know the gist. All I know is
him and Nagel.
Well, Nagel, yeah. But I guess he got in somehow through like his mom. He got invited out to either be on the phone or sit down with an interview with the Irish president, something like that.
Really?
Yeah, like a really big deal. So maybe you should.
That's breaking news for right here.
You should pry into that tomorrow. For sure.
Definitely should have to pry into that because that's good stuff. He
Yeah.
also has a dog named Bilbo, apparently.
Yeah, when we just hung out yesterday.
Yeah, I saw the
and Kodo,
Bilbo bit, and apparently Bilbo. What's your dog's name again?
Kodo.
Kodo.
Yeah.
It's like mini me.
It's like the hair is identical. Everything. It's crazy. So back to topic. I think in those early years, I think I was definitely a scapegoat for a lot of fans.
Absolutely.
Even though we were extremely successful, and we've basically gone exactly how far we have in the past, and but which is fine. I understand. I think it was a product of me being brought here by Ziggy and being that sort of. I mean, you saw the Back to the Future thing yesterday that the Sounders put out, so that didn't help my cause. But yeah, being a product of coming from Columbus with Ziggy and playing multiple positions. And still finding success, but it didn't matter. There's always
Right.
going to be that, that banter, which is fine. And in the beginning, does it piss you off? Absolutely. Deep down, it you think, personally, you think that you have a good understanding of the game and you understand why you're winning games or why you're losing games. And at the point, it got to a point where it is what it is. And then it eventually got to a point where there's a reason why he's on the field and there's a reason why the team's successful, and you hope to be a big part of that. And so, but yeah, when it gets drab, I think each one of us has a different understanding of the game. So you do the best you can to appease reporters, I guess.
There you go. And is that something that you like? Clearly, you're going to say stuff that players might read or coaches might read, and everything you've said, I'm sure, doesn't go over wonderfully with the guys in the locker room, but do you feel like there's an understanding, or is that something you have in your back of your mind that you need to be aware of how this is going to be interpreted?
Yeah, of course. I think you're always skating that line a little bit of what's appropriate, what needs to be said. Sometimes after a game, it's difficult after a loss to come in and you never want to point fingers, and I don't ever want to be the guy to point fingers when my game isn't perfect, so I have no place to point fingers generally. But you always want to be able to get the message across that, from top to bottom, it wasn't good enough. And instead of singling out certain things, I think dancing around the issue, saying, it's our responsibility in the back to get the ball as quick as we can, to get it to the midfielders, to allow enough space to get it to the forwards in good positions. That's an example of if the forwards aren't seeing the ball enough. So I think it's dancing around. And if I don't think the coaches did a good enough job preparing us, then I'm going to say skate around the issue and be enough for the coaches to understand, but not completely throwing them underneath the bus and saying, I didn't feel like today we were well prepared enough. And so I think it is skating that fine line, but also understanding that at the end of the day you have to look at yourself and did you do enough that day to help the team win.
Do you consciously think about helping educate the fans? And because clearly I think fans in this market have come around to appreciate what it is that you do, even though you're not filling up the stat sheet, even though you're not piling up assists or putting together a highlight reel of highlights, but they seem to have come to really appreciate your game. And I don't think it's just because you've been here a long time. I think it's partly because you have helped explain your role, and Siggy has, I think, helped explain your role.
Yeah.
And is that something you think about, like in terms of like educating people, or is that just an offshoot of trying to be honest?
I think it's an offshoot of, it's a byproduct of being honest, and most importantly being honest with myself. If you ask how'd you play today, I'll be the first one to say, raise my hand, that it wasn't good enough. And if I felt like I had a good game, then I'll be the first one to say, I felt good today. And I'll never be the one to really pat myself on the back, and I won't be the one to throw myself into the flames. I think it's the same thing. It's finding that fine line, because I have to keep an even head and even keel, because I can't go too far down and I can't ride too high. And that's when you start to find yourself in trouble, I think. But yeah, like you said, I think Ziggy's done a good job of helping define my role when it was questioned at times. I think, when I was became captain or was named captain, I think there was a lot of why sort of thing. But then you slowly hear you see him directing on the field, you see, him shouting at the players and getting guys going. So from that standpoint, it just something that happens over time. And, obviously it's been it's been a great journey, so far. Obviously, one that's not over, not even close to over, but it's been a cool ride to see, just the progression, and it's also the progression of a fan who's becoming smarter and more intelligent when they watch the games.
Sure, absolutely. And do you like this role? Do you like being I'm sure there are times when you don't want to talk to the media that you do.
Yeah.
And there are other times when you have fun with it.
Yeah, I think after a loss, you don't really want to talk to the media, especially if you score an own goal or something like that. You know what the first question is going to be, and you throw up your hands and say, it is what it is. And then obviously when you win a game and you have the game-winning assist, it's in the 92nd minute. It's let's chat about the game. So it's a byproduct of being the captain. It's part of being here a long time, and I don't think any situation is going to surprise us anymore in what we see on the field. So nothing is going to. After the game, I'm not going to be dumbfounded and say, well, I don't know what happened tonight. I think we've played in every single situation. We've won 5-0, we've lost 5-0, we've come back, we've given up late goals. So there's no question that I think is that I don't, want to answer or that I'm afraid to answer.
And so given your status as being someone that the media likes to talk to, that fans have started to look at as a leader, it seemed like it made sense that you were the player rep at the CBA negotiations. And I know that it was something that happened, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. But how did that experience, and it seemed like it was a tough experience. It seemed like it was something that, a lot of people have not gone through, and if they have gone through it, probably didn't really enjoy it. I mean, what was the whole CBA negotiation like for you?
It was one of the toughest things I've ever done. Mentally, physically, everything. It took a lot out of me. And I think the hardest part was that everybody else had other guys from their team there to kind of bounce ideas off and have a pulse of what their team was feeling, and kind of bringing, what we had discussed in Seattle and bringing that to DC. I didn't have anybody there. My other reps were, Lamar was, I think he was out with a concussion, and Dylan was kind of battling to make the roster at that point.
Right.
And, fair enough, guys have to take after themselves in case the season did start at the right time. So at the time I was like, fine, take care of it. But there were times where, I'd have to go at 3 a.m. there and call, as many guys as I could here in Seattle to tell them the same exact thing over and over and over. And if they had questions, I had to answer them or call them back. And it was really difficult, took a lot out of me.
And all you were doing was learning a new position.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just worry about playing center back.
Yeah, just worry about playing center back for the first time.
Yeah, so that was great to complicate things enough.
Right.
And then obviously not even knowing if the season was going to start, there was a point where we weren't going to accept the terms, and then it was like, all right, I got to report to my guys that we're not starting.
Was there anything you had done in your life that remotely prepared you for that experience?
I mean, I think of guys that were in debate team or part of a club, at least in high school, where they got a taste of it, or I don't know, like a business
student
class
government or something.
Exactly, like student government. I was never part of any of that, so nothing prepared for me or prepared me for what was going to happen and what did happen. Was it a valuable experience? Absolutely. I would have liked to have somebody there with me to kind of bounce ideas off and not be too stressed out, but that was probably the most stressed I've ever been.
So when you go back to the hotel room after a night of negotiating until 3 a.m. or whatever, you just would go home, you'd just go to your room by yourself and have to stew on it?
Yeah, straight to the room, try to disconnect as best you could, get as much sleep as you could in the 4-hour time window, and then you're back at it the next morning at 8 o'clock. And it was really intense. It took a lot out, but ultimately I think it was a deal that we couldn't pass.
And so in those final days when you're walking into it and you're really thinking about the games being postponed and maybe the season being canceled, is the weight of that really is that very much in your mind, or is it just we need to get the best deal we can?
I think it's both. I think ultimately at the last minute we were thinking we need to get the best deal possible. Leading up to it, we weren't set up to succeed, I don't think, in the negotiations. And I think by the second day we understood that we weren't going to get the best deal that we thought we were going to get. So we had to kind of play a hardball type game, and we had to set some demands, and they came back and said we can't meet those demands, and we were like, all right, that's it then. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, you guys have a final offer for us, then we'll negotiate. And it literally went through the night, and I I think at that point it was reality that we weren't going to play. And it was, I think all the talk in the room was, all right, that's it. We're going to postpone this thing and we're going to ride this thing out. Unfortunately, fortunately, depending on who you talk to, it's how the deal went and what we got was, it is what it is.
When you say when you guys weren't well prepared, do you mean from a structural standpoint that the league just kind of had you over a barrel, or that there was just not enough done in the 5 years that led up to it, kind of from a union perspective to get you ready?
No, I think a bit of both. I think you're never. I think maybe we had too high of expectations going into it. I think at a certain point in Vegas, it was all the talk and certainly everything that I think people read was free agency, free agency, free agency, free agency. So when you go into a negotiation and what the league looks at in papers and everything, it's free agency, free agency. Then they say, okay, here's free agency, but here's not much on the money side. And you go in and you're like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
We like free agency, but we also want more money. And they're like, well, this article dated on this day says free agency, nothing about money. This article says this guy said this about free agency, nothing about money. So here you go.
Right.
And then we're like, no. Then we got to go back and we got to discuss what we want to do. Can we give a little on free agency and bump up the money? And then you send that back in, and it's just this constant back and forth. And ultimately, I think they had us by the ringer a bit in that situation.
And so in the aftermath of that, there was some there was some stuff that came out that there was rumors of wide unrest, which clearly was overblown. Like there wasn't. Ended up being approved by the voters, essentially, by the players overwhelmingly. But in the aftermath, there was rumbling that we totally gave in, we did, and it was coming from inside from the negotiating committee. What was it like for you to read that stuff and to hear that you guys had talked so much about being in it together and then have
unity and everything.
Right.
So for me, that was disappointing. I think somebody obviously has a relationship with somebody at Fox Sports who made a deal and said, when this is announced, I'm going to text you right away, or whatever it was. So that right there signifies that it wasn't fully unified to me. Just like with the Sounders, win, lose, or draw, we're all together. Like I said before, I'm not going to point fingers. It's not fair to the group. And, I think for us, it's the same situation when you go into a negotiation.
And I guess in some ways, the fact that there was those leaks maybe showed that the players weren't totally ready to go on strike because it would require real unity, and everyone saying, okay, I'm not going to cross the picket line. And
yeah, I think you're dead on. I think that's a very fair statement, and I said that right when it happened, that we weren't unified, weren't ready at that point. That signifies to me that a lot of talk was being said about us being together no matter what, and then literally 2 seconds after that, before we even left the room, it was on Twitter that the vote count or whatever it was. So yeah, right there it was, it is what it is. At that point, it's done. But yeah, looking back on it now, not as unified as obviously you'd like to be.
Did that process though teach you something about the way that the owners kind of interact with the players and the way that the players interact with each other and vice versa? Like, did you think you learned something about the organization of MLS?
Yeah, I think I learned that I think we all want I think there's owners that want the same as the players, and I also think that there's owners who flat out do not want anything to do with the players. And I think that what I notice is that shift is starting to favor the players' side. And I think that there's now more owners who are willing to not concede, but get things to where the players want them to make them happy. And I think as time goes on, you're going to see more and more and more. Did we progress from what we did have? Absolutely. Was it what everybody wanted? No. But I think from my standpoint, I think, I learned a lot about, maybe one day I'll have to handle my own negotiations and sit down with Adrian and say, this is what I think about myself and where I see myself, but also being very honest about it. And I think, once we're all on the same page and more owners want the same as what we do, I think the players will be happy, and who knows, maybe you see even more growth in MLS.
So it's a different situation, but it's similar in that there's unrest, that there's players that maybe aren't on the same page. There's management that thinks one thing and you guys think another. But your recent experience, you were in U.S. national team training camp, and there was this whole thing with Fabian Johnson. And do you feel like that the CBA negotiations in a way have maybe prepared you for dealing with other situations like this where
I think just as you get older, like we said before, like we've seen everything on the field. We've taken 5-0 defeats. We've won 5-0. So the more experiences that you have, it prepares you for unrest and how to handle that. And I think little things like that can get completely blown out of proportion. And like I said before, it's important to keep an even keel, even head. I was even thinking about it this morning. It's now that it's a week and a half past, you hope that it's just water under the bridge. Mm-hmm. And ultimately you want what's best for the team, and you want the best players playing for the team. So if that requires a phone call saying, are we on the same page now? Then that's what it is.
All right. So how have things been with Klinsmann in the national team? You've now had a fair amount of experience with him.
Yeah, I think right now, overall, I think the ebbs and flows of being a head coach and being a team, there's always going to be ups, there's going to be downs. I think for the 2 years that I was really heavily involved, I think was obviously a peak heading into the World Cup. World Cup qualifying was specifically a couple games that were highlights and the team was flying, but that says a lot about consistency of the group. And I think anytime you're heading into a World Cup, you need that consistency. I think after that, you're always going to try to plug in guys and bring an influx of maybe new philosophies, new coaches, try a few things out, whether that's 4-4-2 diamond, 4-4-2 flat 4, whatever it is. And now the time is to experiment with those things. And I know that things get magnified when it's with the national team. And ultimately the team was 2 minutes away from potentially going into a shootout, and you hope winning that shootout. But I think now is about the only time that you can really experiment and plug in new guys before the World Cup qualifying starts all over again and it starts really ramping up.
Right, and it's crazy to think it's like 2 weeks,
right
3 weeks
corner,
away from. And you had an interesting kind of journey in the national team. You really got into it when you're further along in your career than most players are when they get involved in the national team. Did you know that was coming? Did you have a feeling that you were going to be, did you envision yourself starting whatever it was, 6 of the Hex games and being one of the final cuts before the World Cup?
No, would have never guessed. And I think that's how things, everybody's going to have their own journey. You're always going to have the guys who, write the headlines and who are scoring all the goals and that are givens in certain situations. And then there's, going to be the median guy who just, flies under the radar and gets the job done. And I think that's generally been the case for my whole career. I've got no problem with it. I don't relish, in anything more. I don't crave anything more. So it was obviously a highlight of my career personally. But yeah, I didn't see it coming. I think it was a case of, I don't remember what game it was, but I think, Klinsmann called and I was a last minute add-on to a roster.
Maybe the Germany friendly?
Yeah, I think it was a Germany friendly. Yeah, and it was literally like 2 days before. Can you pack your bags? Are you ready to go? I said, yeah, let's do it. And from then on, it was, consistently involved.
So you look back on it now. Would you say you called it a highlight of your career? Do you look back on any less disappointment about being one of the final cuts, or is that still something that kind of bugs you a bit?
No, I think shit happens, and at the time it was. He sat me down and said, I got to go with my gut here. This is a gut decision. Was I happy with it? Absolutely not. I got up and walked away, but I think I always kept a positive attitude and saying, it is what it is. I think 10, 15 minutes later, I got a call from Twellman and, he explained his exact situation from being left off a World Cup roster and that, better things will lie ahead. And it's such a small moment in your life. It's a massive occasion, obviously. You would have loved to have been involved, but it is what it is at this point. Everything from then on was okay. I don't need to bash anybody because I'm only, I was 30 at the time or 29 at the time. Still a lot of football to be played and opportunities ahead. So kept an even head, and you find yourself back in the mix.
Did he tell you too can become one of the most derided announcers? And well, we love Taylor. We love Taylor.
My mom despises Taylor.
Taylor is a lightning rod. But when you walked out of that room, did you think that was maybe the last time you were going to put on a U.S. shirt?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I thought that was it. Yeah. No matter what anybody said, keep an even head. You don't want to go off the deep end here, because reality is you're going 2 days, 3 days later up to Vancouver to play a game.
Right.
And maybe that was the best thing to happen at that time, was to step back in and play a game and be ready to go. So, it is what it is at that point.
And if I remember correctly, were you a halftime sub?
Yeah, I think halftime came on.
And you ended up
right
playing
back,
center
and
back.
then went to center back
Because Jimmy got hurt?
I don't know what happened, but yeah, something happened. Yeah.
That was another wild game.
Yeah, that was a wild game. Good result though.
It was a good result, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was a tie in that game. I'm trying to remember how the tie came about, but in any case, was it Freddie?
I think it was. No,
it couldn't have been. That was after. That was probably was it Gonzo getting the penalty?
Maybe. I don't remember. All
But
I remember was playing center back.
Right, I just remember that too.
Not realizing that was the writing on the wall at that point.
Right, exactly. And so, similarly, you got called in for this massive Confederations Cup game when you hadn't necessarily been a huge part of the setup before. It seems like Klinsmann, when push comes to shove, does kind of he puts a lot of faith in you.
Well, I think there's something to be said about, like we talked about before, is veteran leadership, and in these big games, I think that was what he was going for. And guys who had experienced big crowds. It's nothing new for us here in Seattle, obviously. Whether it's 45,000 or 90,000, at some point it all is just a big crowd, and you get used to those things. And I think that was the goal there for a lot of the players to not be intimidated, to not be afraid, to know that it was going to be 70% Mexico. And obviously they came out flying. We did a little bit of chasing, and ultimately wasn't the result that the team wanted. But at the end of the day, he's going to call in the guys who, aren't intimidated by those big games.
And coming back to the Sounders, it's been an interesting ride this year. You started off seeming the best team in the league. You had that middle run where seemingly the worst team in the league, and now you're on a 7 or 6 game unbeaten streak going into this final game, and yet you still potentially need a win to get into the playoffs, and you could be as high as a 2nd seed, which is even crazier. How is this season? I'm sure every season is different, but this season has to feel...
Yeah, for sure. I think there's been a lot of stuff this year, whether it's been injuries, Gold Cup, Ziggy's health, Papa's situation, Chad's injury,
Clint's suspension, red cards, whatever it is. There's been a lot of stuff this year. So I think for us to make the playoffs and to make a solid run at this thing would make it even sweeter at the end of the day, to say this is another group of veteran guys who have seen it all before, and we can put little things like that in our rearview mirror, and still, you hope to excel, and you hope to obviously lift the trophy at the end of the day, but there's still some work to be done. But if there's any group, is it a veteran group that gets you through it? Hopefully. There's also something to be said about a young guy who's naive and doesn't know any different and just puts his head down and goes. So I think we're obviously the veteran side of it, and we've seen a lot of situations like this before, and we hope to put all that behind us. So we're going to end this interview with a few short questions, short answers. Okay. I don't expect you to give me too much. But one of the things we talked to you about, I want to bring it back a little bit. One of the things we talked to you about the last time, it may have been the last time we had you on the show, which is embarrassing. But when you were in the studio, 2011, was you're living on the east side, which amazingly you still live on the east side. There. So my first question on this part is, what's your pitch to teammates to trick them into moving on the east side? You've managed to fool a bunch of...
There's no trick. The east side sells itself. I'm telling you, you come and hang out for a day or two with us. Even Kovar brought his dog over yesterday, and he's like, wow, this is a great place.
Even
Kovar. The view, the water, everything. Yeah, young guy coming over. Barrett's there now, a young single guy. So let's not hate on the east side too much.
Okay, fair enough. So I don't know if you grew up with In-N-Out, but you certainly went to college where there was In-N-Out. So you're an In-N-Out aficionado.
Yeah.
You may know this. Christian Roldan tweeted about it, I think yesterday. There's a place in U District called Cali Burger that effectively markets itself as an In-N-Out knockoff.
Yep.
But apparently it's very good. What are the chances that you give it of actually being as good or even better than In-N-Out?
I mean, it has. I've been on the website.
Yes.
And I've seen it's got animal-style fries, whatever they want to call it there, Cali-style fries.
Right.
Same exact everything, it seems. So I'm I'm actually really looking forward to it. I got an invite the other night to like a secret opening, and I couldn't attend.
So this is how Roll Down was there.
Yeah, exactly.
It was apparently across the street from his house, probably too, right?
He's right there.
Right.
Yeah, he's very close, walking distance. So yeah, I'm very excited. If it's anything close, that would be the only thing to entice me to move across the water.
Fair enough. All right, one word to describe Eric Freeberg.
Weird.
One word to describe Siggy.
Legend.
One word to describe Adrian.
Business.
Who do you think you are? No. What gives you the right? Never mind. Best dog park in Seattle.
Marymore.
And what's the one place you take out-of-town visitors when you want to impress them?
I'll take him to Ballard.
And what's the one restaurant you always recommend?
Right now, Maono, West Seattle.
And how about you are known to be a cooking aficionado.
Huh?
What's your signature dish?
Gosh, my signature dish. I make a really good chicken cacciatore.
Fair enough. Well, that's it. That's all I have for you. You handled those well.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
I really appreciate it, Brad.
Thanks,
Good luck on Sunday, and best of luck for the rest of the season because we got to buckle in here, right?
It's gonna be crazy. Crazy. 7 games.
All right, thanks a lot. And that was episode, we're going to call it 198 of Nos Audietis. So
Perfect.
congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. All right, so I guess I need to come up with a decent interview. So thanks for doing this, by the way.
Yeah, no worries.
Been trying to. This isn't quite as awesome as the studio that we had you come into.
Is that real?
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah, that thing's
that's
been
real.
spying on us. It was
Yeah.
It was just sitting quietly in the benches for a while.
I'll kick
Yeah,
it.
the studio. That was a long time ago.
It was like at least
Second year? 2010.
2011, I think.
Was it 11?
2011. Yeah, so 4 years ago. Yeah, that was. Yeah, that was good times.
Good banter.
I think that was the thing that shot you into superstardom.
That was.
That was it.
Hook and ladder. Right there.
You can trace it all back to the interview in.
To be honest, I was like, I pulled up and I was like,
Tesla Studios.
This can't be where I'm supposed to be.
It was pretty sketchy looking.
Yeah, it was sketch.
Yeah, it was across the street from a Shell station.
Yeah.
And
It was near Iwo Jimaya or whatever.
yeah, Wajimaya was like kitty corner to Wajimaya.
Yeah.
There were probably drug addicts hanging out.
You know that Rose and Kasky and Baba, Yale Sodade, used to live above Iwo Jimaya.
Really?
Yeah, that's where they lived for a year. In those
Really?
apartments right
Was
there,
it?
yeah.
Are those nice apartments?
Yeah, they said it was awesome. They didn't need
Oh,
a car.
really?
They could walk, everywhere, whatever they needed. Yeah, it's great.
Who drove to Starfire?
They got picked up by, I don't remember who would pick them up. Somebody would pick them up in the mornings.
Yeah, I
don't
see
remember
Azira drives the carpool with someone now, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, ours is me, Andy, Eric, and Chad Marshall.
That's not a bad
Saving the
carpool.
earth.
There you go. Good. I'm glad to hear you guys are so into greenness.